Season 1 of The Walking Dead begins with Deputy Rick Grimes being shot on the job and falling into a coma. Upon waking up, Rick discovers that the hospital is abandoned and the world has become overrun by zombies, which everyone calls walkers. While searching for his wife Lori and young son Carl, Rick befriends a man named Morgan Jones and his son Dwayne. Morgan explains to Rick the rules of walkers, like their heads needed to be destroyed to be killed, and that if you're bitten by a walker, you'll turn into one. Eventually, Rick leaves Morgan and Dwayne to head to Atlanta in search of his family. In Atlanta, Rick is ambushed by a horde of walkers and rescued by a man named Glenn. Glenn is on a scavenging mission in the city to take supplies back to a group of survivors, which he invites Rick to join. Another member of the scavenging crew is Merle, whose unruly and dangerous behavior forces Rick to handcuff him to a pipe. When Rick and Glenn's crew are overrun by walkers, they are forced to leave Merle behind. Glenn then takes Rick back to his camp of survivors, which includes Merle's outcast brother Daryl, sisters Andrea and Amy, kindly RV owner Dale, T-Dog, the Pelletier family, which included wife Carol, abusive husband Ed, and young daughter Sophia, and much to Rick's surprise, his best friend Shane, his wife Lori, and his son Carl. Rick has a happy reunion with his family, but unbeknownst to him, in the time since his coma and presumed death, Shane and Lori had developed a romantic relationship, and Shane had become a surrogate father to Carl. Lori breaks things off with Shane, but tensions remain high. A horde of walkers attacks the camp, killing many survivors, including Amy and Ed. Rick decides the best decision is to lead the entire group to the CDC facility in Atlanta. Upon their arrival, they find it completely abandoned aside from a single survivor, Dr. Edwin Jenner. Dr. Jenner explains more about the walkers, that there was no hope for a cure, and that everyone on Earth was already infected by the zombie virus, and would turn into a walker upon their death. Finding survival futile, Jenner wants to blow up the CDC with everyone inside. Rick helps his group escape as the CDC building explodes, killing Jenner. In Season 2 of The Walking Dead, Rick leads his group of survivors to search for a permanent home. On their journey, Carol's daughter Sophia goes missing. While searching for Sophia in the woods, Carl is accidentally shot by a hunter. The hunter, Otis, helps Rick rush Carl to the farmstead of Herschel Green. Shane and Otis go on a mission to gather medical supplies needed to save Carl's life, but along the way are overwhelmed by a herd of walkers. Shane shoots Otis in the leg to leave behind as a distraction for the walkers, so he can escape with the supplies. Shane lies to the others that Otis willingly sacrificed himself, and Herschel uses the supplies to save Carl's life. Meanwhile, the other survivors are beginning to make themselves feel at home on Herschel's farm. Herschel is hesitant to allow this large group of strangers to stay on his farm with his family, but reluctantly agrees if they follow his rules. Daryl begins to feel at home in this newfound family and forms a tight friendship with Carol. Lori discovers that she is pregnant, but is unsure if the father was Rick or Shane, creating even more tension in the former best friend's relationship. Glenn develops a romance with Herschel's daughter Maggie, which they must keep a secret from her father. When Glenn discovers that Herschel kept a barn filled with walkers on his property, Herschel explains that they were all his family and he hoped he could save them all by finding a cure. While this upsets Rick, it sends the increasingly unhinged Shane into a rage, who opens the barn doors to let the walkers out. Shane and the rest of the group kill the walkers one by one, including the last walker to emerge from the barn, Sophia. Herschel is distraught over the events at his farm and retreats to a nearby town bar to drink. Rick and Glenn find him and convince him to stop drinking and return home, but they are then attacked by a group of violent strangers. As Rick, Herschel, and Glenn flee, one of the strangers, Randall, is injured. Not wanting to leave the man behind to be killed by walkers, Rick takes Randall back to the farm. Things quickly spiral into chaos over what to do with Randall. The strangers group was violent and would come looking for him, putting everyone at the farm in danger. But if they let Randall go, he could lead them back to the farm anyway. Shane is adamant that Randall needs to die, but the kind-hearted Dale tries to calm everyone down. When Dale is later killed by a walker, Rick is resolved to honor Dale's life by sparing Randall's. Unfortunately, Shane takes matters into his own hands, sneaking Randall off the farm to murder him in the woods. When Rick discovers this act, he confronts Shane. Shane then holds Rick at gunpoint, convinced his best friend couldn't make the tough decisions necessary to keep their group alive. Rick is forced to stab Shane, killing him. When Shane reanimates as a walker, the young Carl is forced to shoot him in the head to save Rick's life. The sound of the gunshot attracts a horde of walkers to the farm, and the survivors are forced to flee. Many of Hershel's family members are killed, but he and his daughters Maggie and Beth escape with Rick's group. During the chaos, Andrea is separated from the others, but saved from the horde of zombies by a mysterious hooded woman named Michonne, who wields a deadly katana. You know, the survivors of the zombie apocalypse are going to need a lot of help in repopulating the earth, and luckily this video's sponsor, Adam and Eve, have the perfect fix. Adam and Eve is America's favorite adult store, and they've been in business for over 50 years. And in that time, they've satisfied over 20 million customers. They've got completely discreet shipping and a 90-day no-hassle return policy, plus 20% of their profit goes toward fighting the spread of HIV around the world. So head on over to adamandeve.com and use promo code RECAP for 50% off one item plus free shipping. Thanks again to Adam and Eve for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to the recap. In Season 3 of The Walking Dead, 8 months have passed and Rick's group decide to set up their new home in an abandoned prison. While clearing the prison of walkers, Hershel is bitten on the foot, though after amputating it to stop the infection, his life is saved. When a prison alarm goes off, walkers begin to swarm, causing chaos within the prison walls. T-Dog sacrifices himself to save Carol, while Lori, Maggie, and Carl find themselves trapped in a boiler room right as Lori goes into labor. Maggie is forced to perform a C-section on Lori to deliver the baby, but Lori dies in the process. Carl is then forced to shoot his mother in the head to prevent her from reanimating as a walker. As the walkers are cleared out and the survivors regroup, Rick is devastated to learn of Lori's death and names their new daughter Judith. Another group of strangers, led by siblings Tyrese and Sasha, also discover the prison and are allowed to stay to join Rick's group. For a time, there is actual peace at the prison, and Glenn proposes to Maggie. Meanwhile, Andrea and Michonne discover the heavily fortified town of Woodbury, led by a man known as the Governor. Michonne is highly suspicious of this leader, but Andrea is quickly won over by his charm. Also living in Woodbury is Merle, who survived being handcuffed during a walker attack by cutting off his own hand. While Michonne begins to investigate the Governor, she discovers that Merle has been tasked with bringing walkers into the town alive for a resident named Milton to experiment on. Other walkers are used for public gladiator fights as entertainment for the Woodbury residents. Disgusted by what she uncovers, Michonne decides to leave Woodbury, though Andrea chooses to stay behind. While searching for a new home, Michonne witnesses Merle capture Glenn and Maggie, who were out looking for baby supplies. Michonne then finds the prison and alerts Rick about Maggie and Glenn's capture. Rick and Daryl accompany Michonne to Woodbury, where they save Glenn and Maggie. While there, Michonne fights the Governor and stabs him in the eye. As the group escapes, Daryl is shocked to discover that his brother was still alive, and Merle decides to leave Woodbury with them. The Governor then decides to declare all-out war against Rick's group at the prison. As Andrea foolhardily tries to make peace between the two groups, both sides prepare for battle. Rick, Carl, and Michonne travel to Rick's hometown to stock up on weapons, where they run into Morgan. In the time that Rick last saw him, Dwayne has died and Morgan has become unhinged by his grief. Rick tries to convince Morgan to join them, but he refuses. When Andrea realizes that peace isn't an option and that the Governor plans on killing everyone in the prison, Andrea attempts to flee Woodbury to warn her former allies. The Governor captures Andrea and locks her in a room with Milton, who he fatally stabs, making it only a matter of time before he reanimates as a walker. Meanwhile, Rick reluctantly comes to the conclusion that they could give Michonne to the Governor to avoid any further violence, and tasks Merle with delivering her to Woodbury. Merle, having seen the positive change the group has had on Daryl, has a change of heart and allows Michonne to escape. Instead, Merle sacrifices himself to lead a walker horde against the Governor's men, which kills many of them. As the season comes to a close, the Governor and his army attack the prison. Rick's group fights back and defeats their enemies, forcing the Governor and the remnants of his army to flee. When the surviving members of the Woodbury army refuse to continue the fight, the unhinged Governor murders them all. Having defeated the Governor, Rick and his allies head to Woodbury, where they discover that Andrea had been bitten by Milton. She gives a tearful goodbye to her old friends before killing herself to avoid turning into a walker. In Season 4 of The Walking Dead, the survivors in the prison, now including the remnants of Woodbury, have been living peacefully for many months. When a fatal flu begins spreading throughout the survivors, Carol murders some of the sick and burns their bodies to stop the illness from spreading further. Carol has grown more strong-willed and pragmatic since the deaths of her husband and daughter, but despite Rick understanding her thinking, he is still forced to banish her from the prison. Meanwhile, the defeated governor meets the Chambler family, Tara, Lily, and Lily's daughter Megan. The governor hides his past from the family and develops a relationship with Lily. When the governor runs into his old right-hand man Martinez, he discovers that Martinez has gathered his own devoted army and arsenal. The governor then kills Martinez and leads his new army toward the prison, in the hopes of taking it over to secure a safe home for the Chamblers. Outside the prison, the governor captures Michonne and Herschel, threatening their lives if Rick doesn't abandon the prison. When Rick instead offers coexistence, the governor executes Herschel and orders his army to storm the prison gates. An all-out war breaks out between Rick and the governor's armies, and walkers begin pouring into the prison. In the chaos, Megan is bitten by a walker, and the governor is forced to put her down. As Rick and the governor enter a brawl, Michonne stabs the governor, fatally wounding him. Lily, distraught over the pain the governor has inflicted upon her family, executes him before she is devoured by walkers. The survivors from the prison are all forced to abandon their home and are separated from each other. The disparate group all begin seeing signs leading to a supposed sanctuary known as Terminus. Along their separate journeys to Terminus, Carol is forced to murder a young girl who murders her own sister in the hopes of turning her into a zombie. Beth is kidnapped by mysterious strangers, and Glenn travels with Tara Chambers before running into former soldier Abraham Ford and his girlfriend Rosita Espinosa, who were escorting scientist Eugene Porter to Washington, D.C. to deliver a supposed cure to the Walker outbreak. As the season comes to a close, Rick, Carl, Michonne, and Daryl reach Terminus, where they are warmly greeted by its leader Gareth and asked to give up their weapons. Rick quickly realizes that something was off about Terminus before they are held at gunpoint and locked inside a train car, where they discover that all of their other allies, except for Carol and Tyrese, had also been captured. But Rick wasn't worried about his group's latest predicament, as Terminus had just messed with the wrong people. In Season 5 of The Walking Dead, Carol and Tyrese help save their friends from Terminus, who it turns out were cannibals. During their escape, Rick's group is joined by Father Gabriel, who is currently experiencing a crisis of faith after locking his congregation out of his church, leading to them all being eaten by walkers. Eventually, Rick confronts and kills Terminus leader Gareth. Abraham, Rosita, Glenn, Maggie, and Tara decide to continue escorting Eugene to Washington, D.C., while Rick and the others stay behind to search for the kidnapped Beth. On their journey to DC, Eugene confesses to the group that he lied about being a scientist and knowing the cure in order to convince stronger people to protect him. Rick's group discovers that Beth has been kidnapped by a group of survivors who have taken over an abandoned hospital. Rick captures members of the hospital group to trade for Beth, but during the exchange, Beth stabs the hospital's leader Dawn. Dawn instinctively shoots Beth dead, prompting Daryl to kill Dawn. Rick's group leaves the hospital devastated. Despite Eugene's lie being exposed, the group decide to continue on their trek to DC. Along the way, tension and fatigue grows as they slowly run out of food and water. When Tyrese is bitten by a walker and dies, the group's spirits are further dampened. Eventually, the group are approached by a stranger named Aaron, who delivers them food and water and explains he is from a walled-off safe zone known as Alexandria. His community had food, water, and even houses with electricity and running water. Despite Rick's fears that Alexandria would be another Woodbury or Terminus, the group hesitantly goes with Aaron. In Alexandria, the group meets the community's leader, Deanna Monroe, and are forced to turn over all their weapons. Despite Rick's suspicions, Alexandria is exactly as Aaron promised. The community was so safe and secure, in fact, that most of its residents were completely unaware and unskilled in dealing with walkers. The members of Rick's group begin to settle in nicely to their new home, including Carl, who begins dating teenage Alexandria resident Enid. Unfortunately, Rick continues to feel paranoid, and discusses with the similarly skeptical Daryl and Carol ways that they could take over Alexandria should things go awry. Meanwhile, Daryl begins accompanying Aaron on his scouting missions, and the two run into Morgan, who has been following a map left to him by Rick to reunite with his old friend. When Rick discovers that the town surgeon Pete is abusing his wife Jessie and sons Ron and Sam, Rick goes to Deanna to take action. Deanna is reluctant to punish Pete as his skills as a surgeon were incredibly valuable. Rick takes matters into his own hands, confronting Pete and getting into a very public fight. Deanna orders Rick to stand down, but he instead draws his gun and points it at the crowd of Alexandrians, ranting that they were too weak and complacent to survive. Realizing that Rick had become an antagonist that threatened all of his allies' place in Alexandria, Michonne is forced to knock him out. As a council determines whether or not Rick should be exiled from Alexandria, an angry and drunken Pete confronts Rick with Michonne's katana. Deanna's husband Reg attempts to calm Pete down, but in the process, Pete accidentally kills him. Distraught over Reg's death, Deanna finally gives Rick permission to execute Pete, just as Daryl and Aaron arrive with Morgan. In Season 6 of The Walking Dead, a now Zen-like Morgan helps his old friend Rick realize that his hardened survival skills needed to be softened now that they were living in a peaceful community. As Rick readjusts to a semi-normal life, he develops a romantic relationship with Jessie. Meanwhile, Maggie discovers that she is pregnant with Glenn's baby. Unfortunately, trouble was lurking outside the walls of Alexandria. First, a villainous group of survivors named the Wolves attack, which Carol leads the charge in fighting off. Then a massive herd of walkers approaches. Despite their best efforts to divert the herd, Alexandria's walls quickly become surrounded by walkers who manage to breach the community's defenses. As the walkers invade Alexandria, the citizens inside are quickly overwhelmed with no chance of fighting back. After being bitten by a walker, Deanna sacrifices herself to buy time for the others to escape. Rick covers his group in the blood and guts of a walker to help them blend in and move through the other walkers undetected. Walking hand in hand through the walker herd, the young Sam begins to freak out, attracting the walkers to him. As he is devoured by walkers, his mother Jessie refuses to leave him behind and is also swarmed by the undead. Jessie's death grip on Carl forces Rick to chop off the arm of his new lover to save his son. In response, Jessie's surviving son Ron holds Rick at gunpoint. Michonne kills Ron, but in the process, Ron's gun goes off, shooting Carl in the eye. Rick manages to give an inspiring speech to rally the surviving Alexandrians, while Daryl leads a team to draw the walkers' attention. And with that, the Alexandrians are able to fight through the night and kill every single walker. 2 months later, Rick has assumed leadership of Alexandria and begun a romance with Michonne, who takes on a motherly role toward Carl and Judith. Rick and Daryl then meet Jesus, who introduces them to another community known as the Hilltop, led by the squirrely Gregory. Jesus explains that a man named Negan was the leader of a villainous group known as the Saviors, who extorted supplies from the Hilltop under threat of an attack. Daryl has a run-in with escaped Saviors Dwight and Sherry, who steal his motorcycle and crossbow. To help bolster the supplies lost during the Walker attack, Maggie makes a deal with Gregory to kill Negan and stop the Saviors in exchange for half of the Hilltop supplies. Rick's group begins hunting down Saviors and slaughtering them at their various compounds. While out on a run, Maggie begins experiencing pregnancy pains and the group attempt to rush her to the Hilltop for medical attention. On their way, the group discovers that all routes have been blocked by the Saviors, forcing Rick's group into a Savior trap. As the Saviors capture everyone and hold them at gunpoint, Negan finally reveals himself. Wielding a barbed wire covered baseball bat he nicknamed Lucille, Negan explains that someone from Rick's group needed to die as revenge for the slaughter of countless Saviors. In Season 7 of The Walking Dead, Negan exacts his revenge by brutally beating Abraham and Glenn to death. Negan explains that Alexandria worked for the Saviors now, and to ensure their further cooperation, he takes Daryl hostage back to the Saviors' home, known as the Sanctuary. While imprisoned, Daryl learns more about the inner workings of the Saviors, where the non-soldiers were forced to perform labor to earn supplies or comfort. Negan also takes many wives, often by force. Daryl also discovers that Dwight and Sherry had returned to the Sanctuary, with Sherry being forced into becoming one of Negan's wives and Dwight having half of his face burned as punishment for his escape attempt. In the time since Daryl last saw Dwight, he had earned Negan's trust and become one of his top lieutenants, alongside another man named Simon. Eventually, Sherry helps Daryl escape before leaving to follow her own path. On his first visit to Alexandria, Negan confiscates all of their weapons and most of their medicine. Rick accepts defeat and encourages his community to obey the Savior's orders. Many in the community reject this notion, including Rosita, who begins a relationship with Deanna's son Spencer, and tasks Eugene with creating live ammunition. When Negan returns and kills Spencer, Rosita uses a bullet crafted by Eugene and a smuggled gun to shoot at Negan, but instead strikes Lucille. In retaliation, Negan kills another Alexandrian and takes Eugene hostage. Eugene quickly submits to Negan's authority and puts his mind to use, earning himself a place amongst Negan's most trusted council. After a pep talk from Michonne, Rick is finally motivated to fight back against the Saviors. Alexandria forms an alliance with Hilltop and another community known as the Kingdom, who had also been forced into servitude by the Saviors. The Kingdom is led by the eccentric King Ezekiel, who has a pet tiger, Shiva, and takes an immediate interest in Carol. Despite her many reservations and guardedness, Ezekiel eventually wins her over and they develop a romance. Alexandria is also supplied guns by the community Oceanside, who had all of their men killed by the Saviors. Rick then forges an uneasy alliance with a group known as the Scavengers, led by the mysterious Jadis. And the final piece to Rick's alliance is Dwight, who offers to act as a double agent to help take down Negan from the inside. As Rick's alliance of communities prepare to go to war with the Saviors, several people grow impatient and attempt to take matters into their own hands. Carl sneaks into the sanctuary to assassinate Negan, and though he fails, Negan is impressed by the teenager's courage. Taking a liking to the kid, he spares Carl's life and returns him home. Sasha also sneaks into the sanctuary to assassinate Negan, but is similarly caught. As Negan arrives at Alexandria to quash the rebellion before it begins, the Scavengers turn on Rick and support the Saviors. Negan offers to trade Sasha for all of Alexandria's supplies, but discovers that Sasha has killed herself and turned into a walker. This distraction gives the Alexandrians a chance to fight back against the Saviors and the Scavengers. When the Hilltop and Kingdom soldiers arrive to join the fight, Negan's army is forced to retreat. In Season 8 of The Walking Dead, the various communities allied with Rick prepare for the ultimate battle against the Saviors. The citizens of the Hilltop oust the spineless Gregory as their leader in favor of Maggie, who rallies them to fight in the upcoming war. During several different battles against the Saviors, many lives are lost. Aaron's boyfriend Eric is killed during a fight between the Alexandrians and the Saviors, while many of the Kingdom's army, including the tiger Shiva, are slaughtered in another fight. The biggest loss to Rick's group is his son Carl, who is bitten by a walker while bringing a doctor named Sadiq to Alexandria. Rick and Michonne are devastated by their son's death, but his undying hope inspires them to continue on with their fight. Meanwhile, many Saviors under Negan's command begin to grow tired of the horrible conditions at the sanctuary. Upon witnessing the atrocities Negan's loyal army commits against their enemies, a group of Saviors led by Alden abandon Negan to join the Hilltop. When Rick convinces the Scavengers to finally turn on the Saviors, Negan sends Simon to kill one Scavenger as punishment to keep the others in line. Finding Negan's punishment too light, Simon instead slaughters every Scavenger except for Jadis. When Negan learns of Simon's actions, he kills him. As the season comes to a close, Negan sets the stage for the Saviors to finally put an end to the war. Eugene leads a factory of workers to craft ammunition for the Savior army. When Negan discovers that Dwight was a traitor informing Rick of the Savior's plans, he begins feeding Dwight false information. This false information leads Rick's army directly into a trap. As the Saviors surround Rick and his allies and open fire, all of their guns backfire due to Eugene sabotaging the ammo. Rick's army fights back against the Saviors, defeating the villainous army. As Rick and Negan brawl in a fight to the death, Rick comes out victorious, slicing Negan's throat. Rick decides to allow Sadiq to save Negan's life, knowing it's what Carl would have wanted. As the various communities begin to rebuild following the war, Morgan goes off on his own to have a fresh start. Dwight goes off in search of his wife Sherry, and Maggie is left angry at Rick for his decision to spare Negan, and vows to take revenge for Glenn's death. In Season 9 of The Walking Dead, 18 months have passed since the defeat of Negan and the Savior Army. The communities have come together and rebuilt during a period of mostly peace. During the past 18 months, Carol and Ezekiel adopt the teenage orphan Henry, Maggie has given birth to her and Glenn's baby, which she names Herschel, Gabriel begins dating Jadis, and Negan has remained a prisoner in Alexandria. Tensions do begin to rise as some former saviors still support Negan's methods and resent their new way of life. The spineless, egotistical Gregory tries to have Maggie killed in order to earn back his role as leader of the Hilltop, though Maggie quickly catches him and has him publicly executed. Jadis begins trading residents to a mysterious new group with a helicopter in exchange for supplies. Rick's decision to keep Negan alive also creates fractures amongst the communities, as Maggie wants to see him dead, as do the women of Oceanside, who begin killing former saviors as revenge for the various murders of the Oceanside men. During construction to repair the bridge to the hilltop, these tensions amongst the communities come to a head. An accident leads to Aaron's arm needing to be amputated, and the bitter saviors start a riot which attracts walkers to the construction site. Rick attempts to lead the herd away, but is thrown from his horse and critically impaled by a piece of rebar. Bleeding out from his wound, Rick sacrifices himself by luring the herd onto the bridge and blowing them all up. As all of Rick's friends and family mourn his death, Jadis finds him alive and contacts her mysterious allies with the helicopter to come pick them up and save Rick's life. 6 years later, the various communities have fallen out of contact with each other, though they continue to grow and rebuild on their own. Michonne continues to raise Judith, who is now an adventurous 9-year-old that has befriended the imprisoned Negan, and Rick Jr., aka RJ, who Michonne had been pregnant with before Rick's supposed death. Aaron adopts the young Gracie. Rosita has become pregnant with Sadiq's baby, though the relationship has ended and she begins dating Gabriel. Carol has married Ezekiel, becoming queen of the kingdom, and the two continue to raise their adopted son Henry. Maggie and her son Herschel have left the communities to join a traveling group led by a woman named Georgie, and Daryl has lived alone for the past 6 years, aside from a dog named Dog, searching endlessly for the body of his old friend Rick. Judith saves a new group of survivors, including Magna, Yumiko, Luke, Kelly, and the deaf Connie, and brings them back to Alexandria. Meanwhile, Jesus is killed when a walker pulls out a knife and stabs him. It turns out a new villainous group of humans known as Whisperers had begun wearing masks made from the faces of walkers to help them blend in amongst the undead herds. Michonne leads a group that manages to capture a young Whisperer named Lydia, who just so happened to be the daughter of the Whisperers' leader Alpha. As Lydia is taken to the hilltop for questioning, Henry begins to develop romantic feelings for her. Lydia has been abused by her mother and wishes to stay in the normal thriving communities instead of returning to live with the violent Whisperers. Meanwhile, the kingdom hosts a massive trade fair between the communities, which Ezekiel hopes will bring the fractured groups back together. At the fair, the leaders of the various communities vow to work together to defeat the Whisperers. Unfortunately, Alpha has secretly infiltrated the fair, where she disowns her daughter and begins luring unsuspecting victims into a trap. As Daryl, Michonne, Carol, and Yumiko go off in search of their missing people, they are confronted by the Whisperers. Alpha shows Daryl a massive walker herd, threatening to lead them to the various communities if anyone crossed into the Whisperers' territory. As Daryl's group departs, they discover that Alpha has made a border designating the Whisperers' land, but what that border is made of shocks and devastates everyone. Atop a series of pikes are the heads of the victims Alpha had lured away from the fair, including Enid, Tara, and Henry. As the season comes to a close, the still grieving communities are hit with a massive blizzard. The citizens of the kingdom are forced to abandon their home and take refuge in the hilltop. Following the death of Henry, Carol and Ezekiel's marriage crumbles, leading them to divorce. And as Negan risks his own life to save Judith during the blizzard, he finally earns some respect from Michonne. In Season 10 of The Walking Dead, many months have passed since the winter storm, and as the communities respect the border set by Alpha, they have seen no sign of the Whisperers. Daryl grows closer to Connie, Ezekiel falls into depression following his divorce from Carol and discovering he has thyroid cancer, and Eugene begins a relationship with a stranger named Stephanie he begins speaking to over a radio. When a fire breaks out in the woods, Michonne sends a team across the border to prevent the fire from spreading. In response, Alpha returns and demands more land as punishment. As the communities face hardships from walker attacks or freak accidents, citizens begin to fear that these were intentional attacks made by the Whisperers. And so many begin to antagonize Alpha's daughter Lydia. Negan steps in to save her from the unwarranted attacks and accidentally kills one of the attackers, resulting in him being imprisoned once again. But it turns out the communities were right to fear Alpha's schemes, as a Whisperer named Dante infiltrates Alexandria and poses as a doctor. He secretly begins sabotaging Alexandria to create paranoia amongst the residents. When Sadiq realizes Dante's true nature, Dante is forced to kill him. Dante is eventually caught and imprisoned, but Gabriel takes justice into his own hands and murders him. Michonne then meets a stranger named Virgil, who offers to take her to an island naval base to gather an arsenal she could use against the Whisperers. Upon arriving at the base, Michonne discovers that Virgil has gone insane following the deaths of his family, and has imprisoned his former allies. Michonne frees the prisoners and manages to talk some sense into Virgil, who takes her to a beach naval boat where Michonne shockingly finds many items belonging to her long-lost love Rick Grimes. Michonne radios Judith to inform her of the possibility that Rick was still alive, and Judith convinces Michonne not to return home, but to instead go off to look for Rick. And so Michonne departs on a journey to find and bring home Rick Grimes. Meanwhile, Eugene is accompanied by Ezekiel and Yumiko on a mission to meet Stephanie in the hopes of forming an alliance with her community. Along the way, they are joined by an eccentric loner named Princess. Eventually, Eugene's group reach their destination, but instead of meeting Stephanie, they are captured by a group of heavily armored soldiers. Carol, wanting to take action against the Whisperers, releases Negan in the hopes that he could do what she couldn't. Negan then joins the Whisperers, slowly winning the trust of Alpha while butting heads with her right-hand man Beta. Negan then joins the Whisperers in attacking the hilltop, burning the entire community to the ground, leaving Alexandria as the final community standing. Following the Whisperer victory, Negan finally manages to get Alpha alone and uses the opportunity to murder her and cut off her head. Unfortunately, Beta was still alive, and the hulking villain rallies the remaining Whisperers to lead a walker herd toward the surviving Alexandrians. Maggie, having received a letter from Carol asking for help, returns just in time to save her friends from certain death. Daryl leads his own group to infiltrate the herd and take out the Whisperers. After Daryl mortally wounds Beta, the villain is devoured by walkers, and Carol and Lydia manage to lead the rest of the herd right over the edge of a cliff, thus finally ending the conflict with the Whisperers. In Season 11 of The Walking Dead, the survivors from Hilltop and the Kingdom have all relocated to Alexandria, which is running dangerously low on food. As Maggie leads a group to search for supplies, they are attacked by a new villainous group known as the Reapers, a small but highly skilled cult-like community led by a man named Pope. Daryl is captured by the Reapers, where he discovers that his ex-girlfriend Leah is a member. Daryl and Leah met and began a relationship during the 6 years that Daryl lived in seclusion following Rick's death. When Daryl refused to give up on his hope to find Rick, Leah abandoned him. Maggie reluctantly asks Negan for his help in defeating the Reapers. Negan begins crafting walker skin masks just like the Whisperers, so Maggie's group can infiltrate a herd of walkers and lead them to the Reaper base. As Reapers begin to die, Leah is appalled by Pope's seeming lack of concern. Realizing that her leader didn't actually have the group's best interest at heart, Leah murders Pope. Leah then turns down Daryl's offer to join Alexandria and continues leading the Reapers in their fight against Alexandria. The Reapers are eventually defeated and surrender, but Maggie slaughters all of them except for Leah, who Daryl allows to escape. Following the Alexandrian victory, Negan decides to go out on his own, realizing he'd never be truly welcome due to his past sins. Meanwhile, Eugene, Yumiko, Ezekiel, and Princess are taken by the armored soldiers to the large and thriving Commonwealth, led by Governor Pamela Milton, which was home to more than 50,000 survivors. After being interrogated by Mercer, the general of the Commonwealth Army, the group is allowed to stay. While in the Commonwealth, Yumiko miraculously reunites with her long-lost brother Tommy, and Eugene is finally introduced to Stephanie. The group is also introduced to Deputy Governor Lance Hornsby, who accompanies them back to Alexandria with soldiers and supplies to help them rebuild. Although this isn't the only offer made by Lance, who also extends a welcome for everyone to join him back in the Commonwealth. Despite Maggie's refusal to join the Commonwealth, most of the Alexandrians relocate to the thriving new community, which in many ways feels like life from before the Walker apocalypse. Although the Commonwealth seems idyllic on the surface, many Alexandrians begin to realize the harsh class divide that only benefited the rich and powerful, like Governor Milton and her spoiled bratty son Sebastian. Despite this, Carol becomes a useful enforcer for Lance, in exchange for him ensuring Ezekiel receive the medical treatment necessary to cure his cancer. As Eugene begins to fall in love with Stephanie, he discovers that she was actually a woman named Shira, tasked by Lance to earn his trust and push him toward leading the Commonwealth to Alexandria. Eugene meets the real voice of Stephanie, General Mercer's sister Max, who reveals her feelings for him are real. Aaron and Gabriel join an outreach mission to bring a community of survivors living in an apartment complex into the Commonwealth. Also living amongst this community is Negan, who has married a woman named Annie with whom he was expecting a child. Unbeknownst to them, Lance believed this community to be responsible for an earlier attack on a Commonwealth caravan, and so the Commonwealth team accompanying Aaron and Gabriel begins slaughtering the survivors. Gabriel manages to send a message to Maggie, who arrives with soldiers to fight the Commonwealth. After killing off the Commonwealth soldiers, the group discovers that Leah was the one who had attacked the caravan. When Lance discovers the deaths of his soldiers, he devises a plan for revenge. He orders the deaths of Daryl, Gabriel, and Aaron, who managed to evade their Commonwealth attackers. He then partners with Leah to kill Maggie, but Daryl arrives to save her and is forced to kill his former love. And finally, Lance's large and powerful army takes control of Alexandria, Hilltop, and Oceanside. Fortunately, Carol manages to strike a deal with Governor Milton, and Daryl captures Lance and turns him over to the Commonwealth, where he is imprisoned for his attempts at usurping the leadership role. The Commonwealth was now a safe place for the survivors to live, although it was still less than ideal due to it being run by the selfish and pompous Miltons. As the Commonwealth throws a massive festival to celebrate its anniversary, an imprisoned Lance orders his still loyal lackeys to murder some Commonwealth janitors. As the arrogant Sebastian Milton gives a speech, Eugene and Max play a recording for the crowd of Sebastian detailing his distaste for the lower class, and how the entire system is rigged to benefit the already rich and powerful. This causes the citizens of the Commonwealth to riot, just as the zombified janitors are released into the crowd, turning the entire festival into a massacre. As Sebastian tries to murder Max by pushing her onto a walker, Eugene intervenes, tossing the walker on Sebastian. As Sebastian cries for help, the crowd ignores his pleas and leaves him to die. Following the death of Sebastian, Eugene is put on trial for his murder and his allies are captured by Commonwealth soldiers. Only Daryl and Carol manage to fight off their attackers. In an effort to find and save their friends, Daryl and Carol are forced to break Lance Hornsby out of prison. He informs them that their missing allies were being used for slave labor at a mysterious work camp known as Outpost 22. When Lance then tries to kill his new captors, Carol is forced to murder him. Daryl and Carol eventually team up with Maggie, Rosita, and Gabriel, who manage to escape their captors, and a team led by Aaron, Lydia, and Luke. On their journey, the group discover that Outpost 22 is in fact the now Commonwealth-controlled Alexandria. And even more threatening was the fact that some walkers had begun to evolve and gain the ability to use weapons. Inside Alexandria, Negan and Ezekiel lead their fellow prisoners in a rebellion against the Outpost's sadistic warden, just as Daryl's team arrives to join the fight. Alexandria is successfully won back, and the prisoners are freed. Maggie is reunited with her young son Herschel, but Rosita is still unsure of the location of her daughter Coco. The new army of the rebellion, known as the Coalition, then march toward the Commonwealth. Back in the Commonwealth, Eugene stands trial for the death of Sebastian, with Yumiko serving as his lawyer. During the trial, Yumiko and Eugene try to use their platform to rally the citizens of the Commonwealth against their oppressive ruler. Although Eugene is found guilty and sentenced to death, his speech works in converting Mercer to the revolution, and the soldier frees him from imprisonment. Mercer then helps sneak the Coalition army back into the Commonwealth before Pamela has him arrested for treason. Pamela then leads the Coalition into a trap, and when attempting to shoot Maggie, the young Judith intervenes and takes the bullet instead. A distraught Daryl rushes Judith to the hospital for help, as Pamela leads a herd of walkers to the Commonwealth's walls to trigger a city-wide lockdown. Unfortunately, Pamela is unaware of the new walker variants, which overrun the city's defenses. As walkers fled the streets of the Commonwealth, Pamela orders her soldiers to protect the city elites and abandon everyone else to certain doom. Although Daryl finds the hospital abandoned, he is able to give his own blood to save Judith's life. Max and Princess then help free Mercer to join in on the fight. In their fight to save the Commonwealth, Luke and Rosita tragically die. As thousands of innocent civilians plead at the gates of the Commonwealth's wealthy estates to be let in and rescued from the approaching walker herd, Pamela orders her soldiers to shoot any civilian that tried to force their way in. Daryl and Mercer then lead their teams to the estates where they successfully overthrow Pamela from power and arrest her. Although Maggie has the opportunity to kill Pamela, she ultimately decides to spare her life, a lesson learned from Rick sparing Negan all those years ago. The survivors then lead the walkers into the estates and blow them all up. With the Commonwealth saved, the survivors were finally at peace. Maggie tells Negan she hasn't yet forgiven him but doesn't want to hate him anymore. A year later, Ezekiel is now the new governor of the Commonwealth, with Mercer and Carol serving by his side. Eugene and Max have a daughter they name after Rosita, and after learning from Judith that Michonne was off looking for a still-alive Rick, Daryl decides to head off in search of them too. Before departing, he says goodbye to Carol, promising to return to see his best friend again one day. And as the series comes to a close, we catch a glimpse of Michonne, still searching for the lost Rick, and Rick Grimes himself, still captured by the mysterious CRM group, but still holding on to the hope of one day reuniting with his family.